we'll try inshallah to get as much information as we can. And if you have any questions, I prefer that you ask them when they come to you, not wait till the end. What I want to talk about, basically I'm going to talk about how a person enters into Islam, and while he's a Muslim, what are the requirements upon him, and then how does he leave Islam. Not that he wants to leave Islam, it's a plus. And in other words, what are the things that deny this Islam. So the first part, we have someone in Boulder, Colorado, who's a little bit famous because he's a little bit strange. One day in the supermarket, the woman was going to give him a change, and he said, I will not accept the change. You're just missing a couple of stories. He said, I will not accept the change from you until you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And he refused. So finally the woman just said Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And he made sajda, and he was very happy. He thinks that the woman, by saying Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah has just entered into Islam. Now that's kind of a strange case, but even more common case is, for example, one brother, he's from overseas, he was going to marry an American woman. And this woman was not Muslim, so his family was a little bit upset that he's marrying a non-Muslim woman from America. So his uncle, who supposedly had some knowledge in Islam, solved the problem by going to the woman and just telling the woman, repeat after me, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And everyone said Allahu Akbar and was very happy. And the woman thought she had just got married. She didn't know what the person was doing. But this is a concept that many people have. They think that they just say the Shahādah and they have entered into Islam. From a legal point of view, you could argue that. But more importantly is, from our point of view, we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our Shahādah. This is much more important. If we look at the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, some people get confused because they take one hadith and they take it out of context. So they disregard all the other hadiths. For example, there is a hadith that says, "Man qala la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah." Whoever says la ilaha illallah will enter paradise. So they think you say la ilaha illallah will enter paradise. But as any good student of Islam knows, you cannot just take one evidence and pull it out and then make your conclusions from this evidence without looking to see what other evidence there is on the point. So if we study, for example, about the Shahādah, we see that there's much more than just this one hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he said, whoever says la ilaha illallah will enter paradise. And in fact, we see from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that there are certain conditions that the Shahādah has to meet. And all of us should look ourselves to make sure that we have met these conditions. The first condition is ilm. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And you have to have knowledge that there is no God except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we make the Shahādah, for this Shahādah to be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we must have an understanding of what it means. Okay? A basic understanding. Of course we don't have to have the fine details of this for example, but we have to have an understanding of what it means. To give an extreme example, if someone says Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah and he means by ilah or Allah Isa alayhi salam, he thinks Jesus is God. So he said there's no God except Allah, and he means by that Jesus. He thinks Jesus is God. Obviously this is not proper Shahādah. So we have to understand, what does this phrase mean? La ilaha illallah. Both the negation and the confirmation. That there is no being, no one that has the right to be worshipped except Allah. And who's Allah? Allah is the one who created us, who revealed the Qur'an and Sunnah, and who described himself in the Qur'an and Sunnah. So we have to, when we say the Shahādah, I think inshallah all of us, when we say the Shahādah now, we understand, we know what it means. But when we deal with new Muslims, when we make da'wah, this is one of the points. We have to make sure that they understand really what the Shahādah means when we say it. The second condition of the Shahādah is yaqeen. Yaqeen, how do you translate this? Certainty. Okay? What do we mean by that? I prefer to give it.
certainty of knowledge, certainty of understanding. You say,
okay. You have to be certain, without any doubt in your heart, that this thing is true. Okay? Because doubt, from Islamic point of view, doubt or shak is kufr. If you have any doubt, it's kufr. So the Prophet said, whoever says La ilaha illallah with yaqeen, he will enter paradise. So that's one of the conditions. How do you get yaqeen? And some people have some doubts. How do they get yaqeen? Basically, there's many ways. Number one is through increasing our knowledge. See, the situation of Islam is the opposite of the situation of the Christians, for example. With respect to the Christians, the general people, in Arabic what they call awam, these are the people who have the most belief in the Bible. They believe that every letter of the Bible is inspired by God. People who have never really studied the Bible, they just call themselves Christians. While those people who study the Bible, they are the ones who are less, who believe less in the Bible. They know there's lots of human errors and lots of these things. In Islam, the situation is the opposite. Al-awam, or the common people who don't study much, these are the people who have the most doubt about the Qur'an or most doubt about hadith. If they hear some hadith, since they don't know how the hadith were collected and everything, they have some doubt about the hadith. While the scholars who studied it in detail, they have the most yaqeen. So one of the ways of getting yaqeen, getting this certainty, is through increasing our knowledge of Islam. Okay? That's two of the conditions. By the way, there's 8. What's another one? Qubul? طرف الشعر علم واليقين والقبول والاختيار والقدر والمسلم. طيب قبول. So you don't answer anymore. قبول. What is قبول?
No.
Acceptance. Okay. What we mean by that is when you make the Shahādah, you must accept everything that Shahādah implies. Okay? In other words, you don't have the choice. For example, you go to the Qur'an and accept part of it. I will believe in this and I won't believe in that. I will believe in Salat and Zakat and these things, but I will not, for example, with Muslim women, I will not believe in hijab or this is Islam for hijab. Or you will believe in Salat or something, but you will not believe in the stories and the miracles that Allah presents in the Qur'an, for example. You must accept everything that is confirmed from the Qur'an and Sunnah for Shahādah to be accepted. You don't have the right to accept something and reject other things just on the basis of your own desire. Okay? As the one hadith or one verse in the Qur'an says, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِيمَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا مِمَّا قَضَيْتَ وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. This verse in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is swearing by your Lord that they will not be believers until they accept you as the decider of their affairs amongst them. In other words, any affair, the Prophet ﷺ, if they make the decision, they have to accept. And another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that if Allah and His Messenger have decided something, then the believers have no say in that. They have to accept. So we have to have that complete qabul, a complete acceptance. So that's how many have we got now? 3? I'm going to ask you all at the end to mention all 8. 7. 7? Okay, 7. We'll delete one now. So what's another one? For those of you who yelled out 7. You just know that there's 7. You don't know.
I know what. Yeah.
So you teach in the class. No, but I like to get to the students involved.
Okay. You got N. You got Yaqeen.
Yeah. N. Yaqeen.
Qubul, right? Okay. The class.
Ikhlas. Okay. What's the meaning of Ikhlas?
Sincere. Okay.
What does it mean here? Yeah, I mean here we're talking about the shurut or the conditions of La ilaha illallah. Be accepted by Allah. Okay, it means that when you well, not exactly. That's the one you're thinking.
You make your Shahādah and you make all of the worship purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, without any shirk, any different aspects of
in particular here, when we're talking about shurut la ilaha illallah, what we mean by ikhlas is that you are saying ashhadu an la ilaha illallah only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, you're not saying it because your family is Muslim, or you're from a Muslim culture, or your brother is a Muslim, or you might get some benefit. You are saying it only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Now, alhamdulillah, for most of us who have converted to Islam, this condition may not be much of a impediment to someone.
Don't be surprised.
But for many Muslims from overseas, they never even considered the fact that they are Muslim for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are just Muslim because that's where they grew up. You know, if they grew up here, maybe they'd be Catholic. They didn't even consider it, they didn't even think about it. And when they make the Shahādah, they don't make it. They never even thought about the fact that they're supposed to make it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, you're supposed to be Muslim for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, what's another one?
Inqiyad.
Inqiyad, okay. What's the meaning of Inqiyad?
Compliance.
Okay. Okay. Inqiyad means to submit to the laws of Islam. Okay, now, obviously, does that mean that if someone commits a sin, he's not making Inqiyad? No?
No.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Hadith Qudsi, he says that he opened his arms wide so that the sinners by day can repent at night, and he opened his arms wide by night so the sinners by night can repent by day.
Okay, so what's the meaning of inqiyad, the submission here?
Meaning that you try to follow what you believe in your actions.
Okay, you have the intention.
Your intentions are that to the best of your ability, you follow what you believe in by practical action. There was, I think, a Hassan al-Basri used to say that your mind is something firmly rooted in the heart, and it is born witness to by the action, like a appropriate action.
Okay. So what we mean by inqiyad here as a condition of la ilaha illallah means that when you say the Shahādah, you have the intention to do your best to fulfill the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Obviously, as brother pointed out, everyone commits sins. Okay? The important thing is that when you commit a sin, you consider that thing as something as being wrong, and you must make tawbah from it. This is inqiyad. So how many have we got now? Five? Okay, what else? Okay, محبة. تقولون محبة كيف؟ Okay. Again, as a shurut of la ilaha illallah, it is close to ikhlas. In ikhlas we said that we're saying the Shahādah only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now muhabba means we're doing it out of the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, we make the Shahādah and become Muslims and enter into Islam because of our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a necessary part of the Shahādah. Okay? What else is there? Sidq. Okay, sidq. What do we mean by sidq?
Truthfulness.
Truthfulness. Okay, in other words, this one is, inshallah, I mean, it's fairly obvious. It means that when we're saying it, we believe it in our heart. We're not saying like the hypocrites, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, that they come to the Prophet and they testify that the Prophet ﷺ is the messenger of Allah, and Allah knows that he is the messenger of Allah, and declares that the hypocrites are liars. Okay? So what we mean by sidq is that we are saying it, we say it with our tongue and we believe it in our heart. We're not saying one thing and we believe something else. Okay? So is that all of them? Okay, quickly, what are they? Okay, knowledge. Say them in
Knowledge, certainty, sincerity, truthfulness, acceptance, love, and compliance.
Okay? Are those clear to everybody? Okay, we know that this Shahādah has to be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order for us to gain His pleasure and to enter paradise. So therefore we should take time to think about these conditions and make sure that we fulfill them in our life. That is, now we are a true believer in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now when we enter into Islam, there's also certain requirements from the statement or from the Shahādah that we make, or from the Shahādah of La ilaha illallah. One of these is called Tawheed has different names, Tawheed al-Sabbat, Tawheed al-I'tiqad. What do we mean by that? Or also Tawheed al-I'tiqad. Anyone came across that expression before? We all know what Tawheed is. I'tiqad is in our belief. In other words, after we enter into Islam, we always have to have this belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that being that He has described in the Qur'an. In other words, that He is all powerful, He is all knowledgeable, and laysa kamithlihi shay, that there's nothing similar to Him. Okay? That's also very important, because some people give other people some of the rights that actually belong only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, there's some groups of Muslims, you'll find it everywhere in the Muslim world, who go, for example, to graves, and they pray to the people in the grave, thinking that the person in the grave will help them. This is what? Shirk. Okay, this goes against to believe that someone else can help you. Or for example, if you look in the books of the Shia, like Usul al-Kafi, they believe that the Imams have all of the knowledge of the world. Again, this is something only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. Okay. So this is one aspect. This is now, while we're in Islam, after we made the Shahādah, we have to fulfill. The second one is Tawheed al-Qasd, or Tawheed al-Ibadah, or Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. They all pretty much mean the same thing. What's meant by this one? Anyone come across these things? Tawheed al-Ibadah, Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah.
Nothing on all your worship to Allah alone. Your worship has to be done in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered us to do it, in the way of Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
That's the only way that we can worship, and the worship has to be the approved worship, not something that we think of our own.
So we have to make our worship solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the brother said, and worship Him in the way that He is supposed to be worshipped according to the Qur'an and Sunnah. So for example, there was a Muslim country, still exists, a Muslim country now, they used to have this festival 1 week out of the year. Muslim country, the population is nearly 70% Muslim. 1 week out of the year they used to have a festival in which they used to make sacrifices to the gods of the sea. Okay? What is a sacrifice? You sacrifice for the sake of a person or being or okay? This is a type of worship, type of ibadah. So this kind of thing goes against Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, or only worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also dua, making dua. The Prophet ﷺ said that dua itself is ibadah. In other words, this is one of the best acts of ibadah, supplicating or making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if someone makes dua against someone in the grave or so, this is against the Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. Okay. The third one, the third necessary aspect of the Tawheed, or of the La ilaha illallah, is Tawheed al-Hakimiyyah. Tawheed al-Hakimiyyah, which is what? This time? No, we finished that. We finished Tawheed al-I'tiqad includes Tawheed al-I'tiqad includes Tawheed al-Hakimiyyah. Anyone heard the expression al-Hakim before? Who is al-Hakim?
Okay, the Prophet is
Okay. Not al-Haq, al-Hakim. What do you mean al-Hakim? You have it. So Al-Hakim is one of the meanings of Al-Hakim is the ruler. Okay. Shahādah al-Hakimiyya means we have to accept the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the supreme law. We don't have the right to make our own laws against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed. That's why in the Qur'an Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Whoever does not rule by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed, then he's one of the...
Are you talking about Tariq al-Rasul?
No, it's called Shahādah al-Hakimiyya. No. Yeah, and this...
You're talking about the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, lordship, and being the ruler, the Lord, and the giver of the Shahādah, and no one has the right to legislate against the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right?
No, but the way I'm discussing it now is a little bit different.
No, I'm not denying it. I'm just relating it because the Arabic term you used, I wasn't familiar with that particular word. So I'm just relating it to what I know so that I understand where it's coming from.
Shahādah al-Rububiyyah in this division, this way of dividing it, comes under Shahādah al-I'tiqād or Shahādah al-Thabat. That there's no creator except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So forth and so on. So these three that I mentioned are required from every Muslim. If he has any shortcoming in that, he is outside the realm of Islam. He negates any of them. And we will discuss in more detail what are some of the actions which negate one's Islam. So there's two other things which are not necessary components, but if we fail in them, then we are committing a sin or we have some shortcoming in our fulfilling the Shahādah. The first of these is to have the khuluq. Everyone know what khuluq means? To have the behavior or the etiquette, the manners or the characteristics which are representative of the Shahādah. What I mean by that is when we make the Shahādah, when we call ourselves Muslims, there are certain behaviors that we are supposed to have. Right? And obviously we're not supposed to lie, we're not supposed to cheat, we're not supposed to steal, so forth and so on. This is part of the Shahādah, but it's not a necessary component. In other words, if we lie, if we cheat, we do not become kafir. But we have a shortcoming in our iman and in our testimony or in our fulfillment of what la ilaha illallah should translate into in our life. So we should have the khuluq or the character that is representative of the Shahādah itself. Okay? And the second one, which again I said, if we don't fulfill it, we do not become kafir, but we'll have some shortcomings in our iman or in our Shahādah. That is to fulfill the commands that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in the Qur'an. And what I mean by that is not just, for example, the salat and so forth, but also the greater commands that deal with society as a whole. Establishing the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Making amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar, enforcing the good and eradicating the evil. All of this is part of the Shahādah. Okay? It's not a necessary component. In other words, if we don't do it, we don't become kafir necessarily, and we'll be committing a sin. But it is actually part of the Shahādah.
I know this is done individually, but collectively, these things have to be done. But you say collectively, these things have to be done as far as the Muslim Ummah, if you will, collectively in that regard, as far as enforcing, the good, and doing the good, and people doing the good for you.
Well, there's different levels to it. Some of it can only be done collectively. For example, some of the aspects of the hudud, you don't do that as individuals.
No, that's what I'm saying.
But some of it is also on the individual level. I mean, you yourself may enter your own mosque and see something, statue or something in the mosque, and you have the ability to remove it. So you have to, in that case, remove it. So we see that from the La ilaha illallah, there are certain things that requires from us. If we don't do it, we become kafir. And I'll discuss these things in more detail later. And these last two are part actually of the Shahādah, are part of our statement that there's no God except Allah. But if we don't fulfill them, we do not become kafir. We're just finished. That is having the khuluq, the Muslim, or the khuluq representative of La ilaha illallah, and fulfilling these commands related to La ilaha illallah. So now we get to those deeds that take us out of Islam. Now many, unfortunately, if we look for example to Bani Israel in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the Jews say, وَقَالُوا لَن تَمَسَّنَا النَّارُ إِلَّا أَيَّامًا مَعْدُودًا وَغَرَّهُمْ بِدِينِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an about Bani Israel, that, or the Jews in particular, they believe that the hellfire will only touch them for a few days, as it's been said. And this is something that they have invented in their own religion. Okay, and it has deceived them. Something they have invented that has deceived them. Unfortunately, many Muslims also, they think the same way. That they enter into Islam, they call themselves Muslim, and if they pray and fast, they are Muslim, and they will go to paradise, and they will not go to the hellfire. But that's not the case. Qala Fawzan in khutbah he gave one time, he said that someone can nullify his Islam in the same way that he nullifies wudu. In other words, he may say the Shahādah and he may pray and fast, but he's doing things that will nullify his Islam, and nothing is left of his Islam, in the same way that someone breaks his wudu and nothing is left of his wudu. So we have to understand what are these actions that take us from the realm of Islam to the realm of Kufr. We have to understand them, of course, to avoid them to the best of our ability. And inshallah at the end, in case I forget, remind me to talk about what's the difference between doing an act which is kufr and actually becoming kafir. One of these actions that take us from the realm of kufr, from the realm of Islam to the realm of kufr, is shirk. And what does shirk mean?
Associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay, associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forgive the one who commits shirk, or the committing of shirk, but he commits, but he forgives whatever is other than that to whomsoever he wishes. So a shirk is something that will land the person in the hellfire. What are some of the ways that someone may commit shirk? I mean, all of us know the word shirk, and we say, avoid shirk, but do we understand some of its manifestations?
You can commit shirk by following man-made law instead of the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Okay.
That would be considered shirk, I believe.
Yeah, if you take someone and say that this person is the lawgiver, okay, and you follow him and obey him instead of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes, it's shirk. We'll discuss that in more detail.
Well, we can shirk in many ways. One such way is to love someone as we should love Allah, trust someone as we should trust Allah, with the hope in a creature instead of hoping Allah, to fear the creature instead of like one to fear Allah. So these are a few ways to sacrifice, for a creature, to bow down to one of the creatures, rather than making the bowing to Allah alone.
So we have two aspects. We have actual actions that we could do which are shirk, like praying to someone in the grave or bowing to an idol or something like that. All of those are shirk. But also, as a Muslim, we are required to have certain feelings in our heart towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we give those feelings to anyone else other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is shirk. For example, as the brother said, if we love other people, other beings or other things more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is a type of shirk. Or we put our trust in someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or we fear someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And fear meaning in that case that this person himself has the ability to do something to us. And fear in the case that this brother is quite big compared to me, fear in the case that he might, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him the ability to hurt me, and he may hurt me, that's something else. But to believe that he himself has the ability, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot protect me, that's a shirk.
So there's also an against to a shirk.
So that's what I said. That's what I tried to finish. But even so, there is two aspects of it, but even in the other aspect of fear really is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to allow him to do it. So everything is related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you get to that level of iman, as one of the shaykhs mentioned in his talk, you realize that everything comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You realize that if you please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you've met the goal. And you don't worry about pleasing other people. You don't fear other people. Because you know that if all of mankind got together to try to hurt you, they cannot hurt you unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows. So all you worry about is your relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do if you. Okay. Another one is close to, well, the second one is close to it. Is to believe that there's some guidance better than that of the Prophet, better than what the Prophet gave. For example, if you believe that Islam is something old and it doesn't meet what we need nowadays, and capitalism is better or socialism is better, this is good. Okay? Because the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an that the guidance is the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So if you believe in any system, any way of life, and think that that system or way of life is better than what the Prophet ﷺ brought, this is kufr. This is kufr. You have a comment? Yeah, that's another one now. So you may not hate Islam in this case I'm talking about. You may say that Islam is beautiful, it's great, but this way of life is better. Okay? Some people, for example, some of the Sufis, they believe that their teachings from some of their what they call the awliya or qutb or ghosts is superior to what the Prophet ﷺ brought. Cool. I believe that there's some guidance better than what the Prophet ﷺ brought. That's clear? Another type of kufr is to set up an intercessor between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, did the people before the Prophet ﷺ believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? They did, right? Did they believe even in some acts of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? Okay. So they had this belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but still Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ had to fight with them and struggle for them. Pretty much we can say all of his life while he was a Prophet, 25 years. Okay? And what was the main thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described about them in the Qur'an? Okay? One of the main things is that they worship other beings and they claim that they are ways of getting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They said we only worship these beings because they bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is wrong. Set up anyone between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is kufr. To believe you have to go through a certain person or you make dua, even the Prophet ﷺ, as many people do, they make dua to the Prophet ﷺ, or they go through the Prophet ﷺ, or they do deeds for the sake of the Prophet ﷺ. All this is wrong. All this. How many of the things that take us to kufr? How many of these things? 3? Okay, another one, also a very important one, is to dislike something of the religion, even if you apply it. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ذلك بأنهم كرهوا ما أنزل الله فأحبط أعمالهم. That is because they dislike something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed, and therefore all of their deeds are destroyed or in vain. Even if you apply it, if you dislike it, it is kufr. Why is this kufr? Why is this something that's unacceptable? So even if you don't say anything is better.
Well, it's just the fact that you think that you dislike this, you must think there's something better.
Okay, let's assume you don't. Okay, just for the sake of argument.
The point of that the revelation is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and part of our belief is we have to believe that Allah's knowledge is perfect, and His revelation is perfect. So therefore, if you dislike anything from the revelation, you are distrusting, either you're distrusting Allah's revelation, that part of His revelation, or you are disagreeing with it or just not liking what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. And no one from the creation has any right to distrust or dislike the order and the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He has perfect wisdom and He knows best for all times what's best for His creation.
If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us to do something, okay, isn't that a sign that that deed is loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Okay. We're all in agreement on that? There's many verses in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us to do something, and then at the end Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Inna Allah yuhibbul muhsinin." Okay, so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us to do something, it means that that's something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits us from something, what does that mean? It means that something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates. Let's take the first two. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering us to do something. That means that this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. And we are going to say we don't like it. Okay? And we are saying that we don't like something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. You get my point? And we don't have that right. If we're at that point, it means our iman, and we're at the very low level of iman. Because it should be the case, and if we really believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we love everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. So if we dislike something, even if we apply it in this, and many of our sisters, especially those who converted to Islam, I've heard them say many things about hijab, which is completely unacceptable. Even if we apply the thing, even if they're wearing hijab, they have to realize that that thing, hijab, is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. It's the best for them in this life and the hereafter. So it's the best for them in this life and the hereafter, and it's something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. How could they dislike it unless there's something wrong with it? So disliking something in the Qur'an Sunnah, even if we apply it. Another one, I'm losing track of what we have the film we can display. Yeah, when I say disliking something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Qur'an and the Sunnah. That's another talk if you want to get into. My specialty is hadith and Sunnah, so if you want to get into that. No. Well, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran about the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَمَا يَنْتَقِي عَنِ الْحَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ, which is not speaking of his own desires, but it is simply revelation. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many verses talks about the fact that He has given the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam al-kitab wal-hikmah. And the ulama agree that the hikmah means the sunnah of the Prophet. Another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the Qur'an, says, ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانًا. It is our duty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, it is our duty to explain the Qur'an. And then in another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرِ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. If we have sent down to you the dhikr, in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, in order to explain unto mankind what has been revealed to them. So if you put these two verses together, it means the Prophet ﷺ's explanation of the Qur'an, which is his sunnah, comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Plus he also said that I have been given the Qur'an and something similar to it, which is the sunnah. And some of the Shahādah, they said that Jibreel used to come and teach the Prophet ﷺ the sunnah in the same way that he taught in the Qur'an. So when I say it's just like something Allah revealed, it includes both the Quran and the Sunnah.
Liking something take what is announced to the neighborhood.
It is kufr, yeah. You leave the middle. You leave Islam. Yeah, these things I'm talking about, it is kufr akbar.
What if this individual returns just so that?
No.
How do you assess it?
يعني لا يعني if يعني it depends on his situation. If he is caught by the rulers that he's doing this, put in prison, then he just makes tawbah by saying, I will not do it again. I am sorry for what I did, and I ask Allah to forgive me. Okay? So that's if he's caught by the rulers because of this kufr, and then he has to make a tawbah. But if it's just himself, he finds himself doing it, and later he wants to make tawbah, and he just asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive him.
Which has never grown to a certain matter again, the person with Tawbah has conditions also. The person, first of all, has to have deep remorse for ever having done whatever that act is. And the person has to, make amends, for it. The person has to, never ever repeat that act. Particularly triple akbar, when I'm repeat. Well, he could become a monopolist,
if you repeat, okay, if you repeat something which you know which is kufr, the two things may happen to him. Number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may seal his heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Qur'an that those people who make kufr and then they come back and they make kufr and come back, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finally seals their heart. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't, and because they have this disease in their heart, so because of that disease, He seals their heart. In other words, they will not come back to it. But the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows to return, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always accepts those. If you go to, for example, Surah Al-Buruj, familiar with Surah Al-Buruj, where the story behind Surah Al-Buruj is some people took some believers, and simply because they were believers, they put them in a pit and burned them alive. Even those people who did that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about them in the Qur'an, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَتَنُوا الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَتُوبُوا فَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ جَهَنَّمَ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ الْحَرِيقِ. Even these people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that those people who did that to the believers and do not repent, then they will get punishment in the hereafter. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always open to repentance. In other words, even if he did it over and over again, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided him back to Islam, he will accept it.
Just maybe getting off the subject a little bit. We were talking about hadith. I hear people that is, they try to differentiate in the life of Allah. They say that everything that he did.
What if we leave it for the end, inshallah? We'll leave some time in the things as he's getting up. The topic. But inshallah, we'll try to get to it. Don't forget. Did you have that?
No, we're talking about to hate the law and the order of Allah and Sunnah. What if someone who just feel ashamed to apply the order, No, we're talking about to hate the law and the order of Allah and Sunnah. What if someone who just feel ashamed to apply the order, because of his position in society or his
inshallah, this is very clear. Being ashamed and not liking to do it is the same thing. The thing he is ashamed, he used the word ashamed, to follow the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he would prefer to please the people by not following the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you prefer to please someone more than you prefer to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,
because psychologically, if you don't do something, it doesn't mean that you should something. If you naturally, you don't have to.
Okay, if he's committing a sin, okay, but if he's in that case we described earlier, that he prefers to please the people instead of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's a serious truth, and because it's hope, as we discussed earlier, is one of the actions of the heart that we have to put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first. We cannot love anyone more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cannot be willing to please anyone more than we're willing to please Allah. So he's treading in dangerous areas there. So another thing which is unfortunately also very common you'll find, for example, people go to the mosque 5 times a day, okay? Or people grow a beard, or women wearing hijab. And you'll find other Muslims making fun of them. Look at these people going to the mosque every day, 5 times a day, and they're growing their beards, or the women wearing hijab. Okay? What about this? This is kufr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قل أبالله وآياته ورسوله كنتم تستهزئون لا تعتذروا قد كفرتم بعد الإيمان. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, was it Allah or His sign, or His commands, or His messenger that you were making fun of? Do not make any excuse for yourself. You have made kufr after Iman. Even if he prays 5 times a day and he prays all night and he fasts, if he does this, it's kufr.
Because even if the person is doing it for fun, and you can't know if the person is doing it, you can't even do it jokingly. For example, if you're saying, well, the person says, well, I'm just doing this to have a good time, and he's making fun of the way some sister wears the veil, or he's making fun of the way some brother goes to the night school every day, just to make the people laugh, even if it's supposed to laugh. This is the example that you brought from the hadith when the Prophet came to the man who was telling jokes about the Shahādah, and telling jokes about the Messenger and when the ayat that you brought was revealed, the man said, oh, but I was only playing, I was just joking. And the Prophet received this ayat, and he's rubbing, he's rubbing behind his camel or horse, whatever he's driving. He's rubbing through the desert behind him.
So it's good to know how careful we have to be. Because in some places in the Qur'an, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that your deeds may be destroyed and you don't even realize it. For example, in Surah Al-Hujurat, talking about how to talk to the Prophet. Do not raise your voice to the voice of the Prophet or your deeds may be destroyed without you even knowing about it, without you even realizing it. So this is why knowledge is so important, to realize these things and do our best to stay with it. So joking about the religion, joking about something about the religion, is not, it's completely unacceptable.
We find that, especially among new Muslims, that there's some ignorance in the Hindu.
Yeah, inshallah, as I said at the end, Imam will talk about the difference between kufr and kafir. So inshallah, we'll do I have a building called very fast now. And then the brother can show it to you and show it to you and you'll be able to hear it. I'm sorry, man. What does the Qur'an say about this? If someone jahl is making fun of the signs of Allah, what should you do? You have to leave until they start talking about it. And you can't just sit there accept it or laugh and type of and then it's completely unacceptable. Little bit. Nothing wrong with that. If the person is alive and he has the ability to do something, and he's got, of course, the ability is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but if he's alive and you ask him to do something, and you put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you can do it for you, nothing wrong with that. So you can ask someone to make dua for you. You can ask someone, for example, if I ask the brother to kill me. But even the Shahādah themselves, even in this specific dua, they were very, very strict. They didn't want to rely upon anyone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Abu Bakr was riding one time and he dropped his stick, and he refused to ask anyone to pick it up. He would stop himself and pick it up. And that's how much they want to rely just upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and themselves, and not rely on each other. If they ask someone for that, it's not considered except for kufr. Another aspect of kufr, another action that takes us from the realm of Islam to the realm of kufr, is to make wala for the unbelief. What's the meaning of wala? Loyalty. To have loyalty for the unbelief. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء بعضهم أولياء بعض ومن يتولهم منكم فإنه منهم. The Prophet ﷺ said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is saying that do not take the Jews and Christians as your awliya, as your close friends, as the people who you're loyal to. They are awliya one for each other. And whoever joins them, and not join them in the sense of becoming Jew or Christian, but join them in the sense of making a love for them, then he is one of them. In other words, he is blessed with them. It has nothing to do with Islam. Even if he calls himself. Yeah, these are the things that I'm discussing here, that even if the person fasts and prays and such and such, he is denying his Islam. He is redeeming his Islam. Let's see, because of the light.
Person, I understand that the person holds up his sin, but he says that his life is still his life. I don't know. But what about a person that wants to associate with, let's say, to a master, because a person, he fulfills or lives a sin with all things, right? And you say, well, I don't like these things because this is the brother for instance, one thing about it, he had a young girl. We know this is some of these but these people, they're trying to say because he gives us a faith. And they're trying to remind you, those are the master because they practice this with the sin. So, now what I want to know, I know it's proof, but there's this particular proof. I know it's proof, it's on different levels. So this particular proof, is this what the people, this particular person or people, are they just proof in the world because they don't like it, or they proof of it outside of Islam?
Well, if it's the case where they reject the sunnah, and they say that we should not do the sunnah, and it's bad to do the sunnah, okay, it's kufr, they want to take them out of the
maybe the point though, because it goes back to what you said earlier, that you have to distinguish between making takfir.
Right, we're getting to that.
Between kufr, because someone can do a kufr, but take them out of the millah, so we still couldn't make takfir on them unless we distinguish and decide on them. So someone can make kufr out of ignorance, and most of them will say that the different takfir means the third second kafir, and that's the other thing that we establish that the kufr is included from.
This would be a good time to do with that topic. Everybody should ask a question about that.
I'm saying because it kept coming back up, man. It's important because sometimes we can, because making takfir is a big issue. You know, the hadith that is powerful and Catholic, it goes up into the heavens and it comes down and we deserve it the most.
Hey, you notice I never said that person was Catholic. I'm not saying this to you, I'm saying this to everyone. You know, it's true that I'm saying this is cooked, that one is cooked. Except maybe I may have slipped one time, maybe Christian. So you people don't care what else denies Islam, you want to get right to the corporate.
So you go cook the master and brothers there treat certain brothers as
What they go tomorrow. Again, to be honest, but I'm from here and I come to this mosque and I see what's wrong in my life. I do with my father, my children, they call it the international people, you know what I'm saying? They got mosques in those, mosques in this, mosques in this, private mosques, every other home, private things, you know what I'm saying? It's going to happen.
I love the thing that we can go, and if you don't speak the language, the language that's not that we're wearing people talk to him from second time. Now, you can go to these people you're around, I mean, because this place is mostly, if you be around atheism. And then that should be like that. You understand what I'm saying?
I know. So this is another big topic. Any question seems to be a big topic. If you want, by the way, this is our last meeting. If you want to arrange another meeting where we can get together, you might be able to bring up some of these things. But this is a very important topic, which is known as al-wala' wal-bara'. Now I'm going to talk about with the sisters. Just going to talk about the first part, al-wala'. This is important for you. Need some details discussed. But there's some for example, suppose you enter a mosque, or there's a group of Muslims, but they do not give you, they do not treat you, for example, like their brothers. So between being with them or being with you and Christians, it's always treat you better. What's the situation in that case? Especially what is their situation, is the Muslim. Because they're the ones who are making the big thing.
You know what? I don't want to do that, but there's one from America who listens to the message of Islam, they kind of say that they're opposed to their characters, like they have really consumed their mind. Okay, so we come here with you, or we come to these mosques, and we all get together, and controversy of character. Well, my point is this, that the brothers who come from the Middle East, East Islam, the brothers from America, and the ones who convert themselves from being Christian Jews, even brothers who are part of the mix of Islam, who come to that and come into Islam, and can then encounter these brothers who, they have their own group mentality, so to speak. You understand?
Okay, I see.
And then when you're talking about teaching something about God, something about history, 1400 years ago, you kind of bring it up to today, you like to say, I said, well, then you're saying that they're conditioned, like, think of the condition. Like, like you're telling me, like, I see this as, like you're saying, well, I know about the here and now. I know what's going on there and now. Okay? This is how I read people. Alright? But we get around ourselves as Muslims. And I have a question, because why do Muslims fight each other? They come from around all over the Middle East. They come over there. They come over here to get an education, so to speak. You understand?
Mm-hmm. Then this is somewhat related to the thing. There's some minimum requirements of wala that every person must have for every other soul. Every other Muslim. And if he doesn't have it, then he becomes kafir. There's another level where if he doesn't have it, he's committing a big sin, which is not kafir. So there is that, where if they don't have hubs for you, I'll just discuss one thing on this, okay? And then I'll get back to the other. For example, the minimum of love between the brothers. If this brother says he's Muslim, he says Shahādah, I have no evidence that he's not a Muslim. The minimum love that I have for him, that I can have for him and still be a believer, is stated in the hadith of the Prophet. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. He said that no one of you is a believer until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. So that is the minimum. If I go below that, I have broken this wala and left. So there are things which are minimum which have to do with the faith. So if they are not fulfilling it towards you, that's their sin. And if it is bad enough, it is even effective. Of course, it is a munkar. It is a munkar evil, a bad. You have to do the best if you can to do.
I have a question pertaining to generic. Me and the University of Philadelphia came across an article in Philadelphia Daily News pertaining to outside the figure, most Muslims. That this one particular individual had attended one of his Japanese paying respect. Or it was, I don't know if he actually, according to what I was told by another Muslim that I trust, he's a very good Muslim, and I think it's good that he has seen a specific individual on television at the place.
According to Abdurrahman al-Bukhari, his book al-Wala' wal-Bara', he says that sending the funeral of Ahl Zimma, he's talking about Islamic State. He said that this is okay, that is permissible. He gave some evidence for it. Some other scholars read this and no, it's not permissible. And I thought I'm not sure which one, I'd have to put in more to try to see which one I'm going to say. Because Rahman al-Khalid said it is an act of birth. And birth is, see there's two things. One is wala. This is where you have love for the other person and you hope the best for the other person. And if the other person is harmed in any way, you have to give him nusra or help. Okay? This is wala. This we cannot give to the kafir. If we give this to the kafir, it's a type of kufr. Another thing is birr. Okay? For example, the Qur'an commands us commands us that if our parents are unbelievers, or if they order us to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we don't know, it still says that we have to deal with them ma'rufan. Okay? So birr in this case is that we deal with them in a kind manner, and we don't cheat them, we don't steal from them, we don't lie to them. Okay? And we're doing it as a sake of da'wah, as setting an example for them that we are Muslims. Sufyan al-Thawri, one of the Tabi'in, he said if you give a piece of paper or an ink container to a non-believer, okay, and you did not do it for the sake of Allah, he said you have left Islam. And that's how extreme it is. But birr is allowed if we treat them properly. So some ulama consider sending their funeral as one of those acts of birr that you can do. Other ulama say no, it does not fall into that.
I have heard of a story with Prophet that there was a woman who tried to force his garden on him when she died with he and Christian and I don't know, but I have one from the source that asking the
Yeah, I'm not sure. There's some discussion about this hadith in the week. Seems to be a conglomeration of two other hadiths. So it is called ma'lul, or defective.
Well,
Okay, let me just go back to this point of takbir and kufr. So we only have I cannot summarize, but I can discuss this point of takbir. Okay, as the brother pointed out, if someone is following a kufr out of a mistake, suppose for example I come to you and I bring you a fabricated hadith. Like I opened the book in my library the other day and I found a hadith, the opening page, the person said it, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Prophet Muhammad that I created everything in this heaven and the earth for you. Okay? This is a fabricated hadith. So if I believe in that, no, I didn't know it's fabricated, I believe in this, I trust the author. So this is a mistake. This is a kufr, this is a belief that it's kufr. This is a mistake. So if the person follows something out of a mistake, okay, and this is kufr, but he may not be called kafir. But we establish the proof against it. For example, Al-Hallaj, you're familiar with Al-Hallaj, the Sufi, he said, Ana al-Haq. He said, what he's saying basically is, I am Allah. Now, he believes in hulul, where Allah comes into the person and becomes one, the person becomes one with Allah. They took him to 70 scholars before they killed him, to establish the proof against it. So if someone is following something out of ignorance, and he may even get into paradise. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that a man committed many sins during his life, and before he died he told his children that when he's dead to skip him, to bury him, to cremate him, and throw his ashes into the ocean. Okay? Now if you believe that by having your ashes thrown into the ocean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be able to recreate you or something like that, that's kufr, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recreated him. He said, why did you do that? He said, because out of fear of you. So obviously his belief is kufr, but it was it's like based on ignorance, not for any other thing. So if it's a situation of ignorance or mistake or a ta'wil and interpretation of the Qur'an which is possible according to the other language, then this doesn't make the person kafir. But at the same time there is some knowledge which is agreed for on every Muslim. Okay? And in other words, it's his a duty to at least learn about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we talk about Shurut La ilaha illallah, the first one is ilm. It's some knowledge that every Muslim must learn if he has the ability. He's not excused from not learning. So we may not call him kafir in this life, but in the hereafter, if he did not even worry about learning about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may teach him himself. So that's a much more important thing.
Because from what I understand, most of the great scholars like you have and others, that you say this is a complimentary and all of that. You know, when you put the Kufa, even the great Kufa takes out of Islam, they would speak on it in terms of the concept. They call it defining specific people that didn't do that. Okay, because you could be, as they say, applied to someone, that person may have a misunderstanding or ignorant on the matter. You could call someone a Catholic, but it's not a Catholic. And the Kufa is that people call someone Catholic for it, like you say, well, it's clear to that person. Like it's clearly explained to that person, he understands that this is against Islam. You understand it and say, well, I don't care. I still want to do it like this here. In that person, you call him Catholic. So until that, in that conversation, even if he's doing Kufa.
If someone is showing himself as a Muslim, of course we don't know what's in his heart. If he's showing himself as a Muslim, we don't have the right to call him a Catholic unless we establish the proof against him. At the same time, we don't have the right for someone who's merely showing kufr to call him a Muslim. Okay? Some converts, they talk, for example, about their grandmother. They said, oh, she was a very good woman, she loved everybody, she was very nice, she was a Muslim. No, we don't have that right. So we don't have the right to call anyone who shows himself as a Catholic, doesn't show himself believing in Islam, call him or her a believer.
Yeah, one question called the Catholic Club. I don't think I'm going to say it quick. If a person says that he is in charge of the Jamāl, and everybody, respecting the church, and he makes an agreement with the United States Army, saying that everybody in the Jamāl will join the army and fight against the Muslim country, will fight even against the Muslim country because we are American citizens.
This is making well up here.
Go ahead.